Dzień dobry Państwu. Przechodzimy do części
Good morning,
merytorycznej naszego
ladies and
spotkania.
gentlemen. We are moving on to the next part of this conference. I'd like to say in a few words
naszej sesji, mianowicie
about
pracujemy
how we are going to
w
proceed.
panelach
We've got three different panels, discussion panels. Each panel deals with a different issue. We start with solidarity without borders, cooperation among trade unions in Europe. Then we will move on to trade unions and society, legitimacy and self-awareness. And finally, we will move on to the situation now. What is the current position of trade unions in Europe and which direction are we heading?
Jeśli chodzi o ramy koncepcyjne, zadaliśmy uczestnikom naszego panelu kilka pytań,
the participants of this panel a few questions.
I nim przejdę do prezentacji panelistów, przedstawię te pytania.
I'd like to present these questions now.
Jak ponadgraniczna solidarność między
Does solidarity without borders when it comes to trade unions in Europe exist? Because normally trade unions act at the national level. Mr. Duda said that there could be some points at which cross-border cooperation is possible. However, sometimes, for example, different level of development of respective countries makes it impossible to cooperate at the international level. So, do trade unions in different countries compete against each other? Do they try to set their members against one another? And this leads us to the issue of solidarity. Is it possible to have this European project?
No i wreszcie, czy związki zawodowe muszą się zeuropeizować, aby być w stanie
trade unions forced to undergo Europeanization in order to act?
Są zorganizowani na poziomie transnarodowym czy ponadnarodowym.
When employers are organized at the international level, we may draw the conclusion that also trade unions should be organized at the international level. However, this may be much more difficult. And now a few words about our panelists.
Pierwsza z osób wypowiadających się to jest profesor Richard Hyman z London School of Economics,
Professor Richard Hyman, representing the London School of Economics,
systemowego.
An acknowledged specialist.
The second guest
is Mr. Hans-Jürgen Urban, executive member of the management board of IG Metall, so an academician. We've got the British perspective, the German perspective, a perspective of a unionist, and a perspective of a representative of the world of science. And Mr. Hyman, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Dzień dobry, guten Tag. Now I will revert to an easier language for me. First of all, I'd like to thank the European Solidarity Centre and the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung for the invitation and to congratulate you on organizing this very important meeting. And I think it's particularly encouraging to see all three confederations represented here today, because I think unless trade unions can talk to each other within borders, it's a bit pointless and a bit over-ambitious to talk about solidarity across borders. So solidarity begins at home, if you like. As we've heard from the chair, we were asked three questions. I'm going to start with, I think, a fundamental one which comes first, which is what do we mean by solidarity? Then talk about some of the incentives and obstacles for international solidarity. We were asked, should trade unions become more European? So I will say something on this. And finally, raise a question, how should we build solidarity? Should we build it from top downwards, or should we build it bottom upwards? or should we perhaps do both, which is probably my position. So what do we mean by solidarity? Solidarity is a historically powerful slogan of the trade union movement, and of course in one of your confederations it is the title. And it's easy, I think, just to use it thoughtlessly as a slogan. But we have to scrutinize, I think, and think carefully, what do we mean when we use this word? It's an ideal, but different people use the idea of solidarity in many different ways. For some people, solidarity is basically charity. You are kind to people in a worse position. It seems to me that, in the trade union sense at least, solidarity is something much broader than this. Much more complicated, if you like, because it involves, first of all, a reciprocal relationship, an interdependence, an awareness that we are all interdependent and therefore need each other. Often it is also a question of struggle, because solidarity, certainly in the classic trade union sense, was solidarity against those forces which are exploiting and oppressing us. And I think that dimension of solidarity remains important today. I think it's also crucial that we realize that solidarity is not a question of either you have it or you don't. Solidarity is always a question of degrees. Whether we're talking internationally or at national level, there are competing interests among workers as well as complementary interests. There are genuine obstacles to united action, which are not simply a question of false consciousness, they are there. And particularly in a harsh economic climate, in a more competitive global context, competing interests can't be simply suppressed. So solidarity is something which can never be completely realized. And I think also we need to think of solidarities in the plural. And again, I think this is one way of moving beyond the sloganizing use of the term solidarity, to understand that there are different kinds of solidarity, there are different groups, there are different interests, and the sorts of interdependent relationships which one cultivates in order to work together are not identical in each case. We have to see solidarity as something complex, multifaceted, differentiated. Then, to move on to the first broad question we were asked, how far can one identify solidarity at the moment? What is its character? The pressure towards international solidarity is enormous, because in countries which have a strong trade union tradition, industrial relations systems evolve very much within a national framework and according to nationally specific rules, beliefs, practices. And what we've seen in the last couple of decades is that many of these national institutions and supports have been undermined. Partly a challenge from above, the rise of globalization, the principles of free movement. And when people talk about free movement, they often think mainly of free movement of labor, but much more of a challenge for trade unions is free movement of goods, services, and capital. And what I often say is that as a trade unionist, I believe totally in the right of free movement for workers. I am much less positive about the right of free movement for capital. And part of the problem is that the European Union tends to be founded above all else on the right of free movement for capital, and free movement of labour is a sort of subtext to that. We also have a challenge from below that certainly in Western Europe, industrial relations systems have mainly involved multi-employer bargaining, what the Germans call the Flächentarifvertrag, covering all of an industry. What we've seen increasingly is multinational employers disconnecting themselves from the regulatory institutions of their own country and creating their own regimes. And beyond this, what is called sometimes the informal economy, the growth of precarious, marginalized, sometimes illegal forms of work outside the boundaries of normal trade union representation and recruitment. Sorry. And this means the capacity for purely national trade union action is severely restricted. And for this reason, unions have to look transnationally. There is also the issue of the European Union, and I'm sure Hans-Jürgen will be saying things about this. Traditionally, in most European countries, trade unions have been among the most reliable supporters of the European ideal. And again, the question they're increasingly asking is, what sort of united Europe is being created? Is it one which is really sympathetic to our own ideals and the interests of our own members? And increasingly, it seems to be a neoliberal form of European integration. And so there is a challenge for unions transnationally to shape alternative projects for European integration. Otherwise, we simply resort to nationalism and xenophobia, which can't be the solution. But when we talk about international solidarity, there are major obstacles. Unions are still very much national organizations. They're based on the assumptions of their own historical and national traditions. Language is a problem. It's not often that you get a context where trade unionists can talk and understand to each other, and without that, how do you get solidarity? The structures of trade unions differ very remarkably across countries, and it takes time to learn all the complexity. Traditions very different, the institutional resources, the extent to which unions actually have the money, the structure of officials, the capacity of informing members, differs radically across countries. And as I said at the outset, there are real divisions of interest which cannot be ignored or suppressed. And we do have institutions of trade unionism at European level, which have some capacities, but these are relatively limited. Sorry, jumped again. We have the European Trade Union Confederation that we heard about before. We have the industry-level European Trade Union Federations. We have the interregional trade union confederations. We have European Works Councils. We have bilateral initiatives by trade unions. But this very complex web of transnational relationships is not, to my mind, very effectively articulated and integrated. And one of the key challenges, it seems to me, is to say, okay, we have all these structures. How can we coordinate them more effectively, especially when we have limited resources? How do we make the best of what we have? Should unions become more European? We were asked. Yes and no is the answer. We can't abolish national distinctiveness. We can't move towards a sort of encompassing European trade union, but it's not necessary to do so. What seems to me important, first of all, is that European and indeed also global issues should receive much higher priority. within trade unions. It's very common for transnational issues to be a sort of specialist function, and we have an international department which handles that, and the rest of the union, the other people in the union, the other officials, the members themselves, don't really need to worry about it. And this is not a proper way to handle international solidarity. There's often we have a saying in English, not in front of the children, which means there are certain embarrassing questions which one should only discuss between consenting adults in private. And it's a particular tendency because for some good and for some bad reasons, many trade union members in many countries are very skeptical about the whole endeavour of European integration. It's very common for trade unions, trade union leaders to feel somewhat embarrassed talking about European issues in front of the members. But this means that the members retain all their old prejudices. They have no input into European policies. There is a disconnect between a leadership involvement at transnational level and the position of the membership. And this has to change. There has to be much stronger integration of transnational issues into mainstream union education and communications. And finally, do we build solidarity from above, from below, or do we have to do both? Unfortunately, we have impressive bureaucratic structures holding impressive formal conferences with elaborate agendas and impressive resolutions. Its real meaning is often very little, precisely because it's disconnected between the bread and butter day-to-day trade union business. And unless the members on the ground understand international issues, have a commitment to the policies which were adopted at international trade union conferences, then the international organisations have no effective capacity to act. They can't turn their programmes into reality. And one of the ironies is that when solidarity is really necessary, it's too late to build it. When you have a crisis, when a company is going to close down a quarter of its operations, will it be in Germany or will it be in Poland or will it be somewhere else? If you don't already have solidarity, you're not going to create it now because the divisions of interest are just much too strong. You have to build solidaristic relationships before you really need them. And this means unions have to do their best to foster everyday solidarity. Solidarity in small things, solidarity on non-divisive issues. At dinner last night, someone was talking about one of the supermarket chains, a German supermarket chain in Poland, which had victimized the union representatives. And here it was possible to get cooperation from the union representatives home in Germany, building support, pressure on the company at home, the sort of context in which it's feasible in a way which doesn't threaten interests one side or the other to work together. European Works Councils, I think, are a very important mechanism, not because the European directive gives them any real powers. As Wolfgang Streeck once said, they're neither European nor Works Councils, but they are arenas in which people can meet from different countries, talk to each other, put faces to names, understand each other, understand their common problems and their common interests, but also their differences. And unless we have this day-to-day solidaristic contact and relationship, solidarity on a big scale will never be achieved. So we have to cultivate mutual understanding and mutual respect from the bottom up, as well as having impressive structures working from the top down. Unless we do both, international solidarity will mean very little. Thank you very much.
Dziękuję, panie profesorze. Poproszę pana doktora Hansa-Jürgena Urbana o zabranie głosu.
Ja, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I would also like to, first of all, thank the organizers of this conference for inviting me to this event, and also for this event taking place in the first place. I'm very happy that I can be present here and take part in this event with you and tell you something from my perspective, from the perspective of IG Metall. Thank you to Richard as well, because Richard's presentation was a very good introduction to my presentation, and I will refer to what he was talking about a minute ago. Now, my introduction to the discussion is divided into 4 parts. The following parts. First thesis, first hypothesis is that currently German trade unions have a pro-European attitude, pro-European approach, and they do not see an alternative to social Europe or social democratic Europe. But still, we have to keep wondering about the situation in Europe and in respective countries. And everybody who thinks in a pro-European way should recognize that Europe is following a very difficult path right now. And I'm afraid that support for European integration in particular societies is going to diminish, because what is happening in Europe now will lead to people seeing that the promises made by the EU have not been fulfilled. For example, economic growth. And this was a perspective that everybody was looking forward to. But we can see that the growth is not here. Maybe in particular member countries, yes, but the overall trend is not upwards. Also, the welfare and economic well-being, it is slowly becoming a privilege for the selected, for the chosen ones. We have a growing gap between the rich and the poor. Also, big differences when it comes to the situation of the unemployed and those who seek employment. Huge unemployment among young people, up to 50% in some areas. Also, other issues. This is definitely not a good prospect for the young people. Also, we have promises about better communications, but this is not taking place. We have our objections, we have our reservations when it comes to the situation in Germany as well. A lack of trust between the trade unions and the government. Also, Angela Merkel is not a very welcome politician in many areas in Europe. Many people think that this is a hidden form of imperialism that Germany is trying to implement now. And also, finally, the promise of democracy in all European countries. Yes, but not in all European countries is it really implemented. I'm not referring to the south or the east of Europe, but I'm talking about Europe in general. We have to say that, in general, the European policy of facing crises is very often about fiscal pacts and other concords, pan-European concords, which will limit personal freedoms. and the freedoms of particular countries. This is an authoritarian approach of European institutions which do not have much to do with democracy, and this in itself is a threat to national democracies. For example, the situation in Greece. You may support or not support the government's policy in Greece, but if Papandreou, Greece's prime minister, thinks that what Troika demanded from the society can be accepted or approved without asking the society for approval, and then after 3 days there are new politicians entering the stage, then you can see that this goes against democracy, actually. We saw a situation where the Greek prime minister was changed within a matter of 3 days. So this was not in line with the democratic approach. It means that we as trade unions, we have to be more democratic. We have to push for the democratic agenda. We need an alternative now for the neoliberal Europe, the Europe of deregulated job market, because we need a common fundament, a utopia, a common positive utopia that will enable us to build on it. What could it look like? This is a topic for a long discussion, but what is the key issue here? The key issue is that we have to resign from liberal policy aimed at deregulation of job market and aimed at limitation of personal rights and freedom and the rights of works councils and particular employees. We have to withdraw from, we have to move towards the policy of reciprocal support. We have to create added value and not stifle the market and the growth. It is also important to think of a transfer union because economies which benefit from the common European market so far have accepted, they have to accept the responsibility for investing in the European market so that the European market can survive. So another issue is the tasks of trade unions. What are the obstacles to solidarity between trade unions, among trade unions? This is what Richard referred to. This is not only about whether we should have solidarity between trade unions, but what kind of solidarity. Of course, we should have solidarity among trade unions. I think in this respect we have three dimensions to look at it, to look at the solidarity among trade unions. On the one hand, we have the works level, the particular company level. There seems to be a need for more cooperation at this level between European trade unions. Cooperation between particular works and particular companies. What instruments do we have? European Works Councils, different forms of cooperation. Maybe they're not sufficient now, but they are quite concrete. They are concrete instruments that we can already use, and it seems to me that better cooperation between trade unions, in particular works in different European countries, can be a good starting point of departure for future development of the strength and capacity of trade unions. We also need to look at it before stronger competition appears, before there is a further push for more competitive wages. There needs to be the second dimension, the dimension of national dimension, the dimension of member states. On the one hand, bilateral relationship, the confederations, the European Confederation is important, but also exchange of experience, exchange of information among particular trade unions within a country and also across countries. It cannot be the case that international cooperation is only the responsibility of particular departments within trade unions, international cooperation departments. No, all trade unionists and all people working for trade unions should be involved in international cooperation. Furthermore, at the national level, we need to go towards a situation where trade unions unify or ally at the European level, because without this we cannot create a better European Union. Because what is happening in the European Union is still a matter of decisions by governments, and I believe the decisions should be made first at the national levels by national governments, and then under pressure from trade unions and the society in general, this should be reflected in European policy. And the third dimension is the European dimension, and here my suggestion is for us to take a look at our limited resources, and these are going to be limited further. We are facing many issues of both national and international character within particular member states. Have been talking to people in Poland, and it seems to me that the Polish unionists have the same problems as the ones in Germany. We simply need a pan-European agreement or cooperation to fight precarious agreements, because precarious agreements are present in all countries in Europe, different forms, but they are present everywhere. And this means that the trade unions are also facing a threat in all European countries, dumping prices, but dumping wages and salaries. These difficulties take different forms and different extents in different European countries, but this is an issue that refers to all European countries. Also, trade unions lose their capacity in very many companies or very many industries where they operate, and this is also happening on a European scale. This means we need to be fighting for bigger authority for the Works Council. If we don't have this capacity, the Works Councils will not be as effective as they could be. We need more membership. If the members are not there, we will not be able to push our agenda through. And one more topic, which seems to me is a universal topic, is retirement and pension schemes. I think right now what we are facing is a deregulation policy of the job market and also the retirement system. The retirement system, pension schemes, all consolidation schemes which are imposed on countries, all of them lead to limitation of pensions. And this is also the field in which we can cooperate jointly and work jointly. We have to cooperate internationally in this respect, because if we don't, we won't be able to change anything. Still yet another topic, employment for young people. If we are unable to offer and ensure jobs for young people in the near future in Europe, if we are unable to do it, there's nothing to talk about. There is no future of solidarity in Europe if the young generation is not involved. This generation will be a lost generation. The precarious agreements is probably one of the most dangerous issues which we are facing. Trade unions are not yet as strong as they should be. And I think it should be demanded from all trade unions to reach, to send a message to the young people, an effective message, so that these people don't distance themselves from trade unions. And this will lead me to yet another issue, which is the principles that we will act by. And here I would like to refer to what Richard said. We definitely need solidarity among trade unions in Europe. But this is a bottom-up. This should be a bottom-up process. We need more European coordination. We need a stronger European confederation. And we also need appropriate policies. In other words, the international structures cannot replace national policies. They can be supplementary, but they cannot replace it. Trade unions have to be strong nationally. If they are not strong nationally, they will not be good partners at the European level. This is the fundament for us, our strength and capacity at national levels. And it's only thanks to this capacity at the national levels that will enable us to cooperate and collaborate at the European level, at the international level. This is a necessary condition. Also, we need curiosity. We need to be curious what the situation is like in other European countries, in other trade unions. Knowledge brings power, but we still don't know enough about what is happening in other countries. We need the curiosity. We need to awaken this curiosity in ourselves. Without this curiosity, we will not be able to solve our problems, our everyday issues, linguistic issues, lack of resources. The curiosity will help us solve these problems. We have to be interested in what is happening across the border. And only if we are interested in it will we be able to create a truly European policy. Also, openness. We need to be open to cooperation with other institutions, with other organizations, which jointly with us want to reach the ideal of a democratic Europe. And I think that when we open ourselves to the civic society, this definitely should be a part of our policy, opening ourselves to the civil society. We should have a colorful picture on the left-hand side of the political scene, a colorful puzzle where you have different elements, and the beauty of this puzzle is only visible when you see the whole of this puzzle. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's not only trade unions which have dilemmas of strategic choice. It's also organizers of conference that have to face these dilemmas. According to the agenda, we should proceed to the lunch break, but I wouldn't like you to treat me as an authoritarian moderator. So I would like to interactively ask you, do you have any questions? Do you have any questions or any points of discussion? Anything that you would like to discuss with our speakers? Feel encouraged to do so. 20 minutes, so we have a Q&A session.
Proszę bardzo.
Piotr Szumlewicz, advisor to OPZZ, one of the Polish trade unions. A general remark at the beginning and then an optimistic remark. I think that European trade unions are very much divided, and I would divide it into three areas. One is the level of development, and when it comes to CO2 emissions, Polish trade unions, German trade unions, and Swedish trade unions cannot come to an agreement because there are differences of interest. Another example, Polish trade unions have been allied thanks to the bad policy by the Polish government. We have appealed to the European Commission and we have actually asked the European Commission, please limit our sovereignty so that we can be better for our employees. However, in Sweden, for example, they do not think that the intervention of the European Commission is welcome. So that's one thing. Another thing that is important for me is the difference in the agenda, in the program. There are some communist trade unions, some social democratic and conservative trade unions. And this is the situation in Poland as well. There are differences at national levels and at the perspectives, in their outlook on life. But also there are international and communist trade unions. But my optimistic conclusion is that is the Polish example, the Solidarność, NSZZ, and the third trade union speak with one voice, even though we have a different, for example, outlook on policy, on family policy. So this is what we need at the international level. We need to work together, but underline also the differences between us. At the international level, we can talk about CO2. This is the difference between us, but in general, we are in agreement when it comes to precarious agreements and the situation on the job market. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Janusz Mochemański, Future and Work Foundation from Kraków. A question to Professor Urban. As a foundation, we analyzed a report, a German report, a statistical report. Wem gehört die Republik? To whom does the Republic belong? This was the title of the report, and it was an analysis of top 100 companies in Germany. If we analyze it, we see that the revenues of these companies increase, but the number of employees dropped over a couple hundred thousand employees. In the biggest companies, we are talking about the biggest companies, and actually the Germans say that the Republic belongs to these companies. So what do you think about it? On the German example, we can see that there is a crisis of unionism in general, but also a job market crisis, and also a request to Mr. Karski, a suggestion. There is a very good book published at the end of the 90s, written by Ulrich Beck, Professor Ulrich Beck, The Brave New World of Employment. I am wondering why we don't have the Polish translation still. Other books by Professor Beck about globalization, we have them, but we don't have this book, we don't have the translation. And we have a very important thread of Brazilianization of work in Europe. Introduction of the social creation of really good workplaces, social welfare state in Europe. Europe is moving in a different direction, in the direction of precarious employment. So I think this book is a very, very good book for the Institute to be interested in. I think the answers will follow all the questions. Katarzyna Skorupińska, University of Łódź in central Poland. I would like to refer to what Professor has just said about cooperation, international cooperation, and the benefits resulting from international cooperation. In reality, I think Polish trade unions have been cooperating successfully on the international stage, and the proof, the evidence, is Poland's participation in the European Works Council before Poland joined the European Union. We are talking about 1990-95. The Thomson, Ben-Kaiser, such corporations, of course, they were only observers. They had the role of observers, but later on, they were legitimate members of the works. So in 2000, in the year 2000 and 2005, it turned out, when I interviewed members of European Works Councils, they referred to the benefits resulting from cooperation between unionists from different countries. Of course, access to the leaders was important, but also exchange of information between members across countries was seen as very important. Also, the relationship between the works councils and the trade unions here in Poland. We have had these works since 2006 based on Polish legislation. situation. Here, actually, the trade unions were the initiators of the works councils. The data from 2007 indicated that 80% of the councils in Poland were created at the initiative of trade unions in Poland. So, of course, the first draft, the first version of the act was not constitutional, and there was an amendment following that. But if it hadn't been for trade unions, then the current number of works councils and the number is not that high anyway. But if it hadn't been for trade unions, there would be a very, very minute number of councils in Poland. Thank you.
Tim Clapham, British Labour Party and Warsaw University. One of the things, with respect, I'm listening with a great deal of interest. I've been a trade union, of course, being a member of the British Labour Party all my life, because we have to be if you are a member of the Labour Party. But what I'm hearing is bleat after bleat after bleat. What are you going to offer? What are trade unions offering? You're complaining about reduction in power, reduction in performance. Well, your memberships are collapsing. What are you doing to make sure that what you offer is in fact attractive to young people who are working in small firms or running their own businesses? I don't hear this. You've all complained, but you've actually come up with no possibilities. You've got these enormous bureaucratic structures, which, with respect, I don't want to be rude, but there's 100 employees. You could create 100 net sites to website them all. So that everybody in every country could in fact be linked. Where is this sort of activity, recognizing the new industrial time we're in? I don't hear it. I just hear the complaint, oh, we're losing members, we're under pressure. What are you going to do about it? How are you going to get your membership up? What are you going to offer the people? Not these these bureaucratic structures that you currently offer. Thank you.
Dziękuję. Proszę Państwa, nie zachęcam przesadnie.
Ladies and gentlemen, I don't encourage you to too much discussion. So the discussion right now and the questions will be stopped, and now the panelists will speak.
Thank you. I don't think there were any specific questions that I was asked to respond to. I'm happy to leave that last question to our trade union representative, though I think what I would say as an academic is that the framework for recruiting and rebuilding membership, as well as the initiatives of unions themselves, is crucial for any possible success. If governments do their best to make circumstances difficult for trade unions, if they encourage forms of work which are virtually unorganizable, then I don't think you can just blame the unions for the outcome. But I think this is, in any case, an issue which will be discussed in much more detail this afternoon. But in many ways, certainly it is a question of unions learning how to respond to the challenges of a different kind of labour force, a different kind of economy. If I can give a plug for the book that Rebecca and I have just published, and there are leaflets outside, we have looked at 10 countries in Western Europe and how they've been responding to the challenges of the new economy and the new labour force. And we've come up with a lot of positive examples and not simply complaints that life is hard. Very interesting question, wem gehört die Republik? And that again is a German question, but I would say almost universally one can see a similar picture. There used to be a saying that a particular company was so successful it moved into smaller premises. And I think this raises an important broad issue. The whole idea of competitiveness is one in which companies increase income and profits and do it in part by employing fewer people. The notion of economic recovery and labour market recovery are two very different concepts. And we see in my own country at this very moment when the government claims the economy is recovering, for ordinary working people, it doesn't seem like that. And one of the key tasks for trade unions, I think, is to come up with a model of economic recovery which is job-rich and not profit-rich. And here, I think, is one particular area in which alliance with other progressive movements that Hans-Jürgen mentioned is a very important part of the issue. I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Dziękuję bardzo. Poproszę pana
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Urban.
Ja, vielen Dank für die interessanten Fragen.
Thank you very much for this interesting input. When it comes to translation of Mr. Beck's book, it's difficult for me to take a stance on that. But Mr. Beck likes to say too much, and when he talks about the situation of trade unions in the current times, he said that trade unions are like zombies because they are almost dead, and I think that it's an overstatement. So we have to be very careful when we consider what Mr. Beck writes and says. But of course he tried to warn trade unions and to encourage them to be more active. So okay, we could translate this book. And now the next question. When it comes to the differences between trade unions, it seems to me
Richard hat in seiner Definition, was Solidarität ist, einen wichtigen Aspekt angesprochen. Die umfassende Idee von Solidarität ist wunderbar.
A very complex idea of solidarity is something very beautiful, but it's a utopian idea. Pure solidarity is something which cannot exist in trade unions in Europe because there are too many conflicting interests and too many differences between respective trade unions. It seems to me that we have to give up this illusion. We are one European trade union movement. Well, this is not the case. What can we do? We have to admit that there are differences between respective trade unions, and despite these differences, we have to try to reach cooperation. We are not going to overcome these differences. They are going to be there, but we have to cooperate despite them. Unity is a very important concept for trade unions in Germany, and it's very difficult for us to understand that in different countries, perhaps trade unions do not cooperate so much. But okay, this is the case. Also, plants in one country can cooperate, can compete against each other, against one another, because they want to survive. This is also the case. So we have to admit that there are differences, but despite these differences, we have to agree on certain issues. We have to work out a compromise. We have to work out results that are fair to everyone, to every party. And this is the effort, and this is the task of European Works Councils. So we cannot have an idealistic stance, because this will lead us to frustration and to nothing else. And now the question, who does the Republic belong to? Well, I could answer this question in a very simple way and say that IG Metall for 2 years has had more and more members. So the membership is rising, and there was a time in the past that the membership is slowing, but this is not the case any longer, and we are very happy about the fact that the membership is rising at present. When it comes to precarious employment or temporary agency work, well, we are tackling these issues very effectively. For the past 2 years, we've been organizing We've been able to organize 60,000 people working under such conditions, and we signed a collective bargaining agreement which states that these precarious workers enjoy the same rights as workers with secure status. On the other hand, when it comes to union density, we are losing in some industries. So union density is decreasing in some industries, and this poses a kind of threat. Restructuring of companies, this is also a problem. Only the most important, the crucial operations are undertaken by employees with secure status, and the other operations are being outsourced to different countries, to different locations. This is also a threat, because more and more people are precarious workers. And we have to think, how do we want to organize the activities of trade unions in Germany? We've got in Germany trade unions which deal with the services sector, and we've got trade unions which deal with the industry sectors.
Im deutschen Gewerkschaftsmodell ist hier der Streit.
And when it comes to the German model of trade unions, there is an ongoing debate concerning the competence of respective trade unions, because these competences are becoming to overlap. We have to organize ourselves, because the discrepancy between trade unions dealing with services and trade unions dealing with industry, these discrepancies are diminishing. We have to care about all employees. We've got to care about employees who don't have traditional employment contracts, who work under precarious conditions. We have to encourage these employees to join trade unions. So at the end, I'd like to say that we are not only talking about what we should do, but we are trying to do it. And the path that we follow is clear to us. We have to follow this path now. Ladies and gentlemen, we are discussing the issue of fairness, and it will be fair to have a lunch break now and to discuss some things during the lunch break. Thank you.